I overheard my father tell my sister your sister is not getting a single thing. I looked through the crack in the heavy oak door and saw my mother smiling in complete agreement. They thought I was just the reliable workhorse, the one who would silently absorb their financial ruin, while they handed the entire family legacy to their golden child. I did not storm in. I did not scream or beg for the love they were never going to give me. Instead, I walked out the front door, got into my car, and moved every single cent of my money that very night. But what they did not know was that by cutting me out, they were actually signing their own financial death warrant. They thought they held all the cards. They were dead wrong. My name is Natalie. I am 34 years old, and I work as a senior wealth manager in Chicago. Last Friday night, I drove out to my parents' suburban estate for my mother Susan and her 60th birthday party. The sprawling house was full of catered food, expensive champagne, and fake smiles. I had spent the entire evening making polite conversation with relatives who only wanted free investment advice. Around 10 o'clock, I went looking for my coat in my father Richard and his private study. The heavy door was slightly ajar. As I reached for the cold brass handle, I heard my own name. I paused, my hand freezing mid-air. My sister Olivia, who is 30 and runs a consistently failing lifestyle boutique, was speaking in that high-pitched, whiny tone she always used when she wanted money. "But what about the tax liabilities on the export company, Dad?" she asked. "If Jamal and I take over the house and the commercial properties, we simply cannot afford to pay the business debts." Then my father spoke, his voice calm and authoritative. "You and Jamal do not need to worry about the business debts, sweetie. I am calling the estate lawyer on Monday morning to restructure the paperwork. We are removing Natalie from the family trust as a beneficiary, but we are intentionally leaving her name as the primary guarantor on the corporate holding accounts. Let her deal with the IRS audits and the angry creditors. She can afford the hit with her fancy salary. We will transfer the deed to the estate and the remaining liquid cash directly to your joint accounts." My stomach twisted into a tight, painful knot. I pressed my shoulder against the wall, scarcely daring to breathe. My father was actively plotting to use me as a human shield for his bankruptcy. He was going to saddle me with a massive tax debt while transferring every asset of value clean and clear to Olivia. I waited for my mother to intervene, to say that this was wrong. Instead, I heard the familiar clinking of ice in her bourbon glass, followed by a soft, dismissive laugh. "Richard is exactly right," my mother said, her tone dripping with entitlement. "Natalie is a senior financial advisor making excellent money in the city. She has no husband, no children, and no real responsibilities to tie her down. Carrying a few $100,000 in corporate debt for her younger sister is the least she can do to repay us for the life we gave her. After all, Olivia has an image to maintain, and Jamal needs clean credit for his real estate ventures. It is time Natalie actually contributed something meaningful to this family." The sheer audacity of her statement hit me like a physical blow. Contributed something meaningful. For the past 5 years, I had been the one quietly managing their complex tax filings. I was the one who had set up the very irrevocable trust they were now discussing. They viewed my success not as something to be proud of, but as a resource to be plundered. I had meticulously shielded them from bankruptcy, all while they secretly despised my independence. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been the scapegoat in your family, only to realize your worth was entirely tied to what they could take from you. I stood in that dark hallway, listening to them toast to their brilliant plan. They clinked their glasses, celebrating the financial ruin they were about to drop on my head. A younger version of me would have burst into that room crying. But the 34-year-old wealth manager in me felt nothing but a cold, sharp clarity. They thought they had outsmarted a financial expert. They thought they could use me as a dumping ground for their failures. I quietly pulled my hand away from the doorknob. I did not make a single sound as I turned around and walked down the long carpeted hallway. I slipped out the side door, leaving my coat behind. The cold Chicago wind hit my face as I unlocked my car. I sat in the driver's seat, stared at the massive house my father was so desperate to save, and smiled a slow, icy smile. I pulled out my phone and opened my secure banking application. Using the power of attorney they had foolishly given me years ago, I began initiating the wire transfers. It was time to show them exactly how a wealth manager handles a bad investment. The drive back to my downtown Chicago apartment was a blur of neon lights and freezing rain. My phone stayed silent on the passenger seat. They had no idea I had been there. They were probably still pouring champagne, laughing about how perfectly they had trapped me. For years, I had been the good daughter. I spent my weekends untangling my father and his chaotic business ledgers. I negotiated with vendors when his cash flow dried up. I even parked my own personal investment returns in our joint family accounts just to inflate his asset profile so he could secure better commercial loans. I did all of it because I believed family protected family. I was a fool, but I was not going to be a victim. I walked into my apartment, threw my keys on the counter, and did not even bother turning on the main lights. The glow of the city through my floor-to-ceiling windows was enough. I sat down at my kitchen island and opened my laptop. The screen illuminated the dark room, casting a pale blue light across my face. I took a deep breath, letting the final shreds of my loyalty to them evaporate into the cold air. Then I logged into the Secure Wealth Management portal. 5 years ago, when my father was facing a brutal medical malpractice lawsuit related to a botched equipment shipment, he had been terrified of losing everything. He came to me not because he respected my career, but because he was desperate. He handed me full financial and legal power of attorney over all his personal and corporate accounts. It was a blank check of authority designed to let me build an irrevocable trust to shield his remaining assets from a court judgment. And because I was the only one who actually understood how these complex legal vehicles worked, I had structured it perfectly. I saved his business, his estate, and his reputation. The lawsuit eventually settled out of court, but they never revoked my power of attorney. They liked having me as their unpaid accountant too much to close the door. Their laziness was about to cost them dearly. I navigated to the main dashboard of the family trust. I stared at the numbers. Across 3 different high-yield savings accounts and a joint corporate holding account, there was exactly $1.2 million in liquid cash. That money was not the product of my father and his brilliant business acumen. It was the compounded interest and capital gains from my own early tech investments that I had foolishly grouped into the family portfolio to help them maintain an illusion of wealth. Legally, because of the way I had drafted the trust to protect it from his creditors, the money was classified as mine. I had just left it there because they convinced me it was the right thing to do for the family legacy. Tonight, the legacy ended. I opened a second tab and logged into a private offshore banking portal. 2 years ago, when I first started noticing my sister Olivia withdrawing large sums of cash from the business accounts for her ridiculous boutique, I had quietly set up a limited liability company in Delaware called Apex Financial Holdings. I was the sole proprietor, completely isolated from any of their financial disasters. It was meant to be my emergency parachute. Now I was pulling the ripcord. I initiated the first wire transfer. I selected the primary business operating account. My father used this one to pay his suppliers and float his lifestyle. It had just over $500,000. I typed in the routing number for Apex Holdings. I selected the maximum amount available, leaving exactly $10 in the account, just so it would not automatically trigger a closure alert to his email. The screen prompted me for the dual authentication code. The security token was linked directly to my phone, a system I had insisted on setting up years ago to protect them from hackers. I typed in the 6-digit code. Enter. The green confirmation box appeared. The money vanished instantly. I did not stop there. I moved to the joint savings account my mother used to fund her country club membership and luxury vacations. $300,000. Transferred. I went to the secondary investment portfolio they had planned to liquidate next week to buy Olivia her new house. $400,000. And transferred. With every click of my mouse, I felt a heavy weight lifting off my chest. For years, I had carried the burden of their financial survival. I had absorbed their stress, fixed their mistakes, and endured their condescension. Now I was simply taking back what belonged to me. I sat back in my chair and watched the balances refresh to near zero. A strange sense of calm washed over me. I was not stealing. I was just executing a perfectly legal asset reallocation under my authorized power of attorney. The money was safe, and the family trust was effectively hollowed out. I closed my laptop, walked over to my bedroom, and fell into the deepest, most peaceful sleep I had experienced in years. The storm was coming for them tomorrow, but tonight, I was finally free. I woke up the next morning at 7 without an alarm. The sun was streaming through my windows, casting long golden shadows across my hardwood floors. For the first time in my adult life, I did not wake up with a knot of anxiety in my stomach about my father and his impending financial disasters. I walked into my kitchen, ground some fresh coffee beans, and took my time brewing a perfect cup. I did not rush. I stood by the window watching the city wake up below me, savoring the bitter, rich taste of the dark roast. It was not until I sat down at my kitchen island with my laptop that I finally picked up my phone. I tapped the screen to wake it up. The notifications instantly flooded in. I had 47 missed calls. 20 of them were from my father, 15 from my mother, and 12 from my sister Olivia. Underneath the missed calls was a wall of frantic, increasingly unhinged text messages. I scrolled to the very top to read them in chronological order, treating them like a fascinating case study rather than a family crisis. The panic had started exactly at 9:15 in the morning. The first message was from Olivia. It read, "Natalie, why is the primary corporate card declining? I am at the Gucci boutique on Oak Street, and it keeps saying insufficient funds. Call the bank right now and fix this. I am standing at the register with my friends, and this is humiliating." 10 minutes later, another text from her. "Natalie, answer your phone. The sales associate just tried Jamal and his backup card, and that declined too. Are you ignoring me? I am literally shaking. Do your job and call the fraud department." I took a slow sip of my coffee, picturing the exact shade of red Olivia, and her face must have turned. She loved to parade around the Gold Coast luxury boutiques with her friends, treating retail workers like peasants while swiping a card funded entirely by my silent investments. The thought of her standing at a marble counter holding a designer bag she could not afford, watching the card reader flash red over and over again, brought a genuine smile to my face. Her fake wealthy aesthetic had just collided violently with reality. By 9:45, the tone of the messages shifted. My father had clearly woken up and logged into the banking portal. His first text was a single question mark. 5 minutes later, a barrage of pure rage followed. "Natalie, where is the money? Where is the $1.2 million? I just tried to wire the weekly payment to our overseas logistics supplier, and the account has $10 in it. Call me the second you see this." Then the realization must have hit him. He must have checked the transfer history and seen the destination routing number, because at 9:55 the text turned from confused to threatening. "You stole it. You actually stole from your own family. I do not know what kind of sick game you are playing, but you have until noon to wire every single penny back, or I am calling the police. You are a thief. You are dead to us. Answer the phone, you ungrateful brat." My mother chimed in shortly after, playing her usual role as the emotional manipulator. "Natalie, I am having palpitations. Your father is screaming and throwing things in his office. You are going to give him a heart attack. How could you be so selfish? We are your parents. Put the money back right now before you ruin this family forever." I read through every single message, feeling absolutely nothing but vindication. Ruin this family. They had already ruined it the night before when they laughed about destroying my financial future. They were just angry that I had beaten them to the punch. They were not mourning the loss of a daughter. They were mourning the loss of their personal bank. I set my phone face up on the counter and watched the screen light up again. Incoming call. It was my father. His contact photo flashed on the screen, a picture of him smiling on a golf course paid for by the very funds I had just reclaimed. I let it ring 3 times. Let him sweat. Let him feel a fraction of the helplessness he had planned to inflict on me. Then, with a steady hand and a perfectly calm heart, I swiped the green button to accept the call. It was time to introduce them to the new rules of the game. The line connected, and I did not even get a chance to say hello before my father shouted through the speaker. "Are you out of your mind?" he screamed, his voice cracking with a mix of rage and panic. "I am going to have you arrested, Natalie. I am calling the police right now and telling them you committed wire fraud. You stole $1.2 million from this family. You are going to prison." I held the phone a few inches away from my ear, letting him rant. I could hear my mother crying in the background, a dramatic breathy sound that she always used to make herself the center of attention. I walked over to my kitchen window, looking down at the tiny cars navigating the Chicago streets below. "Are you listening to me?" he yelled, slamming something heavy on his desk. "Wire the money back immediately. If you reverse the transfer in the next 10 minutes, I will tell the bank it was a clerical error and I will not press charges. But if you do not, I swear to God I will ruin your life." I took a sip of my coffee. It was still perfectly warm. "Are you finished?" I asked. My voice was completely flat, devoid of the fear he was so desperately trying to provoke. There was a split second of silence on his end. He was used to me apologizing. He was used to me scrambling to fix whatever crisis he had created. My calm response threw him off balance. "Do not use that tone with me," he growled. "You are a thief." "I am not a thief, Richard," I said deliberately, using his first name. "I am simply a wealth manager executing my duties. And before you embarrass yourself by calling the authorities, let me remind you of a few basic facts regarding federal financial law." "I do not care about your financial nonsense," he interrupted. "You emptied the family accounts." "Those were not the family accounts," I corrected him sharply. "Let us take a trip down memory lane. 5 years ago, you botched that massive medical equipment shipment to a private hospital network. You were facing a crippling malpractice and breach of contract lawsuit. You came to my apartment in tears, terrified that the court was going to liquidate everything you owned." "That has nothing to do with this," he stammered, his volume dropping slightly. "It has everything to do with this." I continued pacing slowly across my living room. "Because to protect your assets, you begged me to set up an irrevocable trust. You specifically chose an irrevocable trust so that legally the assets no longer belong to you, putting them out of reach of your creditors. And because you and Mom wanted to maintain clean credit profiles, you made me the sole legal beneficiary and trustee of those specific funds." "That was just paperwork," he argued, though his voice was starting to waver. "It was a technicality to protect the family money. You know damn well that cash belongs to the business. You are trying to steal the livelihood of this family based on a loophole." "It is not a loophole, it is federal law," I replied coldly. "An irrevocable trust cannot be modified, amended, or terminated without the permission of the beneficiary. That is me. And let us be completely honest for once. The $1.2 million I moved last night was not even your money to begin with. For the past 3 years, your company has barely broken even. You have been bleeding cash to fund Mom and her country club galas, and Olivia and her vanity boutique. The only reason those accounts had any liquidity was because I parked the compounded returns from my personal tech investments in that trust. I used my money to inflate your asset profile so you could keep renewing your commercial loans. I subsidized your fake wealth." He was breathing heavily into the phone now. The silence was thick and heavy. I could hear the gears turning in his head as he realized the massive, inescapable trap he had built for himself. "You cannot do this to us," my father finally said. The booming rage was entirely gone, replaced by a hollow, sinking desperation that I had never heard from him before. "We have vendor payments due tomorrow morning. The logistics company will halt all shipments if the wire does not clear. Olivia and Jamal need that cash for the down payment on their new house by Friday. If you do not put that money back, the commercial lenders will notice the drop in liquidity and they will call in the business loans. We will lose the company. We will lose the house. We will lose everything. I guess Olivia will have to return that designer bag she was trying to buy this morning," I said, unable to keep the satisfaction out of my voice. "Maybe Jamal can use his amazing real estate connections to find you a nice one-bedroom apartment." "Natalie, please," he begged. We are your family. You stopped being my family the moment you decided to use me as a human shield for your debts, I answered. So go ahead. Call the police. Call the FBI. Call the IRS. Tell them that your daughter removed her own legally protected funds from a trust that you explicitly signed over to her 5 years ago to dodge a lawsuit. Tell them exactly how you operate your business. Let us see how excited the federal authorities are to investigate your history of hiding assets. You are a monster, he whispered. No, I said smoothly. I am just the reliable workhorse. And my shift is over. According to the conversation I overheard last night in your study, you and Mom had a brilliant plan to restructure the estate. You were going to leave me with all the corporate tax liabilities while you gave Olivia the pristine assets. Well, now you can give her the company exactly as it is. Broke. Good luck with the restructuring, Richard. I heard the chaotic fumbling of the receiver being wrestled away, followed by the sharp intake of breath that signaled my mother taking control of the conversation. Susan had never liked to get her hands dirty with the actual mechanics of the family finances, but when her lifestyle was threatened, she could pivot into a professional victim faster than anyone I knew. Natalie, sweetie, please listen to me, she sobbed. It was her full theatrical crying voice, the one she usually reserved for dramatic public displays of affection, or when she needed to guilt-trip my father into buying her expensive jewelry. You are not thinking clearly. You are upset, and I understand that, but you are making a terrible mistake. I am thinking clearer than I have in my entire adult life, I replied, staring out at the morning traffic on the avenue below my window. No, you are not! Susan wailed, her voice rising in pitch to force a sense of panic. Your father is a proud man. He made a mistake in how he spoke about the trust last night, but he loves you. We both love you. You cannot destroy your own flesh and blood over a silly misunderstanding. We have a massive balloon payment due on the commercial bank loan by 3 o'clock this afternoon. The lenders are already breathing down our necks. If that money is not back in the primary operating account by lunch, the bank will automatically put the entire business into default. I listened to her desperate pleas, amazed at how easily she could weave lies into her tears to serve her own agenda. A misunderstanding, I repeated, testing the word on my tongue. Is that what you call it when you smile and nod while your husband plans to stick your oldest daughter with hundreds of thousands of dollars in tax liabilities? Was it a misunderstanding when you agreed that I had no real responsibilities and existed solely to be an unpaid debt sponge for Olivia? You are twisting our words, she gasped, though the slight hesitation in her voice betrayed her absolute guilt. We were just exploring all our legal options to protect the family legacy. You have always been so capable, Natalie. We knew you could handle the pressure. Olivia is fragile. She cannot handle stress the way you do. You have always been the strong one. Please do not do this to your sister. She is closing on her dream house on Friday. If you keep this money, her mortgage application will be denied. She will be devastated. I felt a cold rush of absolute clarity wash over me. The sheer audacity of her logic was breathtaking. She was actually demanding that I finance my own financial execution so that my younger sister could buy a mansion she did not earn. Her mortgage will be denied because she has no actual income, I said, my voice dropping to a low and lethal register. Her boutique has not turned a profit in 3 years. She is playing business with my money. And as for your commercial bank loan, you should probably call your loan officer right now and ask for an extension. Tell them the truth for once. Tell them your guarantor has officially resigned. Susan dropped the sweet crying mother act instantly. The tears vanished, replaced by a venomous hiss that echoed through the speaker. You have always been a bitter and jealous girl, she snarled. You have always hated your sister because she is beautiful and married and happy, while you sit alone in that cold apartment obsessed with your spreadsheets. If you do not wire that money back by 3 o'clock, I will make sure every single person in our extended family knows exactly what you did. I will ruin your reputation. You will never be welcome at another family gathering as long as you live. I smiled, taking the last sip of my coffee. Do you promise? I asked softly, because never having to see any of you again sounds like the best return on investment I have ever made. Have a wonderful day, Susan. I pulled the phone away from my ear and pressed the red button, cutting off her furious screaming. I stood in the quiet sanctuary of my kitchen, the silence wrapping around me like a warm blanket. For the first time in 34 years, the invisible chains tying me to their endless demands were broken. I walked over to the sink to rinse my mug, feeling lighter than air. Then my phone buzzed on the granite countertop. It was not a call. It was a text message. I picked it up, expecting another paragraph of insults from my mother or a legal threat from my father. Instead, the screen displayed a message from Jamal, my loud, flashy, and endlessly arrogant brother-in-law. Jamal liked to project the image of a highly successful real estate tycoon, constantly posting photos of expensive watches and leased luxury cars on social media. In reality, he was a glorified middleman who survived entirely on my father and his business connections. I opened the message. It was short, aggressive, and reeked of his usual misplaced confidence. "You messed with the wrong person this time, Natalie," the text read. "You think you can steal from my wife and get away with it. Just wait. I am heading downtown right now. I will personally come to your corporate office and handle this face to face. We will see how tough you are when your boss finds out you are a thief." I did not reply to his text. I simply locked my screen, put on my tailored charcoal suit, and headed to the office. My firm occupies the top 2 floors of a sleek glass high-rise in the Chicago financial district. It is an environment built on absolute discretion, strict professionalism, and quiet power. We manage portfolios for high-net-worth individuals, people who do not raise their voices or cause public scenes. By 10 in the morning, I was sitting in my corner office reviewing market trends and ignoring the periodic buzzing of my phone hidden in my desk drawer. I felt completely in control of my day and my life. Then at exactly 10:30, my desk phone rang. It was the front desk receptionist. Her voice was trembling and tight with panic. "Natalie," she whispered into the receiver. "There is a man out here demanding to see you. He is causing a massive scene in the lobby, and he brought 2 very aggressive-looking men with him. He says he is family, but he is refusing to lower his voice." Before I could even ask her to call building security, I heard the shouting bleeding through the thick glass walls of my office. I calmly placed the phone back on the receiver, stood up, smoothed the front of my jacket, and walked out into the main corridor. There he was, Jamal. He was wearing his signature look, a tight navy blue suit that was one size too small, a flashy gold belt buckle, and a pair of oversized designer sunglasses resting arrogantly on the top of his head. As a self-proclaimed real estate mogul, he always tried to project immense wealth, but the desperation always leaked through. Flanking him were 2 massive guys in cheap, ill-fitting gray suits who looked like they had been hired off a late-night internet ad for amateur bodyguards. They stood with their arms crossed, trying to look intimidating. Jamal was pacing the polished marble floor of the reception area, gesturing wildly and speaking loudly enough for the entire floor to hear. He wanted an audience, and he was making sure he got a big one. "Where is she?" Jamal bellowed, pointing a thick finger at the terrified receptionist behind the mahogany desk. "Go get Natalie right now. I want everyone in this building to know exactly who they are working with. She is a thief. She embezzled over $1 million from her own elderly parents in the middle of the night. I am not leaving until she comes out here and faces me like the criminal she is." The rhythmic typing and hushed phone conversations across the open floor plan abruptly stopped. Financial analysts and junior associates popped their heads over their cubicles, their eyes wide with shock. Several senior partners, including my managing director, Mr. Harrison, stepped out of their private glass offices to witness the unprecedented spectacle. Mr. Harrison frowned deeply, crossing his arms, his eyes darting between me and the screaming man in the lobby. "In the world of high-end wealth management, reputation is your only currency. A public accusation of embezzlement, even a completely false one, could be a career-ending disaster." That was exactly what Jamal had calculated. He thought the threat of public shame and the risk to my corporate job would force me into immediate submission. He wanted to break me in front of the people I respected most. I did not hide or run back to my office to call the police. I walked slowly and deliberately down the center aisle, my heels clicking sharply and rhythmically against the hardwood floor. The entire office watched in dead silence, the tension so thick it felt suffocating. I reached the reception area and stopped just a few feet away from him, keeping my posture perfectly straight. Jamal puffed out his chest, trying to look physically imposing, but I could see a slight nervous twitch in his jaw. He was fully expecting me to be crying, begging him to keep his voice down, or dragging him into a private conference room to negotiate. Instead, I looked at him with the exact same detached analytical interest I would give a poorly structured and failing investment portfolio. "You wanted to see me, Jamal?" I said, keeping my voice perfectly level and calm, refusing to match his chaotic energy. "You are certainly going out of your way to get my attention this morning." Jamal sneered, turning his head slightly so the gathering crowd of my coworkers could hear his every single word clearly. "Do not play dumb with me, Natalie," he practically spat, taking a step forward. "You logged into the family bank accounts last night and drained the entire life savings of your mother and father. You took the money meant for my wife. You are sitting up here in your fancy glass office pretending to be some brilliant financial mind, but you are nothing but a common fraud. Put the money back right now, or my associates here will make sure the police drag you out of this building in handcuffs." It was a masterclass in manipulation. He was casting himself as the righteous, strong protector of the family, bravely standing up to the greedy corporate sister who preyed on her vulnerable parents. He specifically wanted my boss to hear the word fraud. He thought he had backed me into an inescapable corner. He had absolutely no idea he was standing on a landmine. I stood completely still, letting the heavy silence of the room stretch out. My refusal to react physically unnerved him. Jamal was used to dealing with people who matched his volume or cowered under it. My absolute stillness was a language he did not understand. He took another step forward, invading my personal space, bringing with him the overwhelming scent of cheap designer cologne and stale coffee. He crossed his arms, leaning back slightly to look down his nose at me. "Do you understand who you are dealing with, Natalie?" he asked, his voice dripping with condescension. He looked around the lobby, ensuring he still had the attention of my colleagues. "I am not your weak, elderly father. I am not someone you can just manipulate with a few keystrokes. I am a highly connected real estate developer in this city. I sit on boards. I play golf with the senior partners at the biggest commercial banks in Chicago. I have zoning commissioners on speed dial. I move millions of dollars in acquisitions before you even finish your morning commute." He paused, letting his ridiculous claims hang in the air. I knew for a fact that his last real estate transaction was a tiny duplex in the suburbs that my father had to co-sign for, but I let him continue. He was digging his own grave, and I was more than happy to hand him the shovel. "You sit up here in your little glass box playing with other people and their money," he sneered, gesturing dismissively at the high-end decor of our firm. "You are just a glorified calculator, a W-2 employee. You live on a salary taking orders from your bosses while I am out there building actual generational wealth. I am an entrepreneur. I create value. You just push paper. And now you have decided to push the wrong paper. You stole from my wife. You stole from the woman I love, and I am going to make it my personal mission to destroy your life." He turned his attention away from me and looked directly at Mr. Harrison, my managing director, who was still standing outside his office. "Are you the man in charge here?" Jamal asked loudly, pointing his chin at my boss. "Because if you are, you need to know that you are harboring a criminal. She drained her own family trust fund last night. Over $1 million. She took the money meant to pay her father and his medical bills. She stole from a sick old man. If you do not fire her immediately, I will make sure my network knows exactly what kind of unethical, fraudulent people you employ here. I will make one phone call to my contacts at the SEC and have this entire floor audited by the end of the week. I will ruin this firm." A collective gasp rippled through the junior analysts. Mr. Harrison did not blink. He was a veteran of the financial industry, a man who had navigated market crashes and corporate takeovers. He could spot a desperate, over-leveraged con artist from a mile away. He simply adjusted his glasses and continued to watch, trusting me to handle the situation. Jamal turned back to me, emboldened by the lack of interruption. He thought he was winning. He thought he had successfully painted me as a corporate villain and himself as the wealthy, righteous hero. "So here is what is going to happen, Natalie," he said, lowering his voice slightly to a threatening growl. "You are going to pull out your phone right now. You are going to log back into whatever offshore account you moved that money to, and you are going to wire it directly into my primary holding account, not your father and his account. Mine. I will manage the family finances from now on. If you do that right now in front of me, I will walk out of here and not call the police. I will let you keep your little corporate job." He snapped his fingers, and one of the large men in gray suits stepped forward, trying to look intimidating. "But if you refuse," Jamal continued, his eyes wide and manic, "I will ruin you. I will drag your name through the mud in every financial circle in this city. You will never work in wealth management again. You will be blacklisted, broke, and facing federal prison time for wire fraud. I am giving you 10 seconds to pull out your phone and make the transfer." I looked at the veins bulging in his neck. I looked at the slight tremor in his hands. He was putting on a massive theatrical performance, but underneath the loud threats and the fake bravado, I could smell the pure, unadulterated panic. He did not care about my father. He did not care about the family legacy. He needed that money because he was drowning, and my sudden withdrawal of the funds had just pulled away his only life preserver. 10 seconds, Natalie," he shouted, starting to count down. 10, 9, 8. I did not reach for my phone. I did not break eye contact. I just let a slow, icy smile spread across my face. It was finally time to pop his fragile, arrogant little bubble. 7. Jamal counted, his voice echoing in the large marble lobby. 6, 5. He was dragging out the numbers, waiting for me to break, waiting for the tears or the panic that he was so used to seeing from the women in his family. I kept my hands resting easily at my sides. I did not reach for my phone. I did not flinch. When he reached the number 3, I finally moved, but I did not reach for my pocket to make a transfer. Instead, I calmly turned my head toward the receptionist, who was still frozen behind her desk, clutching the main telephone receiver. "Martha," I said, my voice cutting through the tension in the room with absolute clarity. "Please call building security and have this man and his 2 friends escorted off the premises immediately. If they resist, inform security to contact the Chicago Police Department and press charges for trespassing and harassment." Jamal stopped counting. His mouth hung open slightly, the aggressive facade slipping just enough to reveal the profound confusion underneath. He looked at my managing director, Mr. Harrison, expecting him to intervene, to fire me on the spot, to do anything that validated the ridiculous narrative he had just spun. But Mr. Harrison simply nodded at Martha, confirming my order. Martha quickly began dialing. "You are making a huge mistake," Jamal stammered, his voice losing its booming theatrical quality. He took a half step back, suddenly realizing that the power dynamic in the room had not shifted in his favor. "I am giving you a chance to fix this, Natalie. Do not push me." I stepped forward, closing the distance between us. The 2 hired muscle guys shifted uncomfortably, unsure of what to do since no one was throwing a punch. I reached into the inside pocket of my tailored jacket and pulled out a small, neatly folded stack of papers. I had printed them out 30 minutes ago, anticipating that either my father or Jamal would be foolish enough to show up here. I unfolded the papers slowly, making sure Jamal could see the official bank letterhead at the top of the page. "You talk a lot about building wealth, Jamal," I said, keeping my voice low enough so that only he and the first few rows of spectators could hear. "You talk about acquisitions and investments. But you and I both know you have not closed a legitimate real estate deal in over 14 months. You are living off the fumes of my father and his failing business, and you are terrified because I just cut off your oxygen supply." "I am a developer," he hissed, though the sweat was now visibly beading on his forehead. "You are a parasite," I corrected him smoothly, "and a careless one at that." I looked pointedly at his left wrist, where the heavy gold watch gleamed under the recessed lighting of the lobby. "That is a beautiful Rolex you are wearing, a day-date model in solid 18-karat yellow gold. Retail price is roughly $45,000. It really screams success." Jamal instinctively pulled his arm back, dragging the sleeve of his tight navy suit over the watch. His eyes darted nervously around the room. "It is funny, though," I continued, my voice dripping with cold amusement, Because according to the corporate credit card statement from my father and his logistics company, a card that I manage and reconcile every single month, exactly $45,250 was swiped at a luxury watch boutique downtown just 3 weeks ago. My father does not wear gold watches. He wears a smartwatch. That is a business expense. Jamal choked out his voice, dropping to a frantic whisper. It was a gift for a client. You do not know what you are talking about. I flipped to the second page of the stack. I know exactly what I'm talking about, I said. Because I also have the statements for the secondary expenses. The client dinners at incredibly romantic, dimly lit restaurants. The weekly charges for a luxury apartment rental on the south side of the city that is definitely not zoned for commercial office use. The expensive jewelry purchases that Olivia has never worn or posted on her social media accounts. The color completely drained from his face. The aggressive, arrogant real estate mogul vanished, replaced by a terrified man who suddenly realized he was standing naked in front of a firing squad. I leaned in closer, dropping my voice so only he could hear the final, devastating blow. I know about the mistress Jamal. I know about the apartment you are renting for her using my father and his corporate funds. So before you threaten to ruin my career or audit my firm, you should ask yourself a very important question. Does Olivia know that you took the money meant for her dream house and used it to fund your second life? Because if you do not walk out of those glass doors in the next 5 seconds, I will text these exact statements to my sister, my mother, and your own mother. Jamal stared at me, his eyes wide with sheer, unadulterated terror. He opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. The 2 security guards in dark uniforms stepped out of the elevators, walking briskly toward our group. Jamal did not wait for them. He did not say another word to me, to Mr. Harrison, or to the crowd of coworkers watching him. He simply turned around and practically sprinted toward the revolving doors. His 2 confused bodyguards scrambled to keep up with him, their cheap suits flapping as they hurried out of the building. I watched him practically fall into the back of his leased car outside. I neatly folded the statements, slipped them back into my jacket pocket, and turned around to face my office. The lobby was completely silent. I smoothed my lapels, offered a polite professional smile to my colleagues, and walked calmly back to my desk to finish my morning reports. The rest of the workday passed in blissful silence. Jamal and his disastrous visit became nothing more than a brief source of office gossip that faded by lunchtime. I finished my quarterly projections, packed up my briefcase, and took a cab back to my apartment. I ordered sushi, poured myself a glass of crisp white wine, and settled onto my velvet sofa. For a few hours, the world was perfectly quiet. But I knew my family. I knew their egos could not handle a silent defeat. Since intimidation and physical confrontation had failed spectacularly, I knew exactly what their next play would be. They were going to weaponize their social circle. At exactly 8 o'clock, my phone began to vibrate against the glass coffee table. It was not a phone call or a text message. It was a rapid, continuous stream of social media notifications. I watched the screen light up repeatedly with the blue icon. Someone had tagged me in a post. Then someone else shared it. Then the direct messages started pouring in from relatives I had not spoken to in nearly a decade. I picked up the phone, unlocked the screen, and opened the application. There it was, sitting right at the top of my newsfeed. My mother, Susan, had composed a masterclass in digital martyrdom. It was a massive wall of text, accompanied by a carefully selected, highly edited photo of her and my father from 3 years ago, looking tired but stoic. The post began with a dramatic declaration of heartbreak. She wrote that she never thought she would have to air family business in public, but the betrayal was too deep to hide. She went on to weave a completely fabricated narrative about how my father was suffering from severe, undisclosed medical issues and how they had entrusted their entire life savings to their eldest daughter for safekeeping. According to Susan, I had abused my position as a financial advisor to trick 2 confused elderly parents into signing over their retirement funds. She described the $1.2 million not as my own capital gains, but as the money they had bled and sweated for over 40 years. She claimed I had drained their accounts in the middle of the night, leaving them unable to pay for my father and his necessary medications, and threatening to leave them homeless. She painted herself as the weeping, loving mother who had given me everything only to be stabbed in the back by a greedy, soulless corporate monster who cared more about designer suits than her own flesh and blood. She ended the post by begging for prayers and asking the community to help her pray for my dark, corrupted soul. It was a stunning piece of fiction. If I did not know the actual truth, I probably would have felt sorry for her. Below the post, the echo chamber had already ignited. There were over 80 comments, mostly from our extended family, and Susan and her country club friends. The toxicity was breathtaking. My Aunt Brenda, who had not worked a day in her life and lived entirely off her husband, commented that I was an absolute disgrace to the family name and should be thrown in a federal penitentiary. My cousin Todd, who was currently on his third failed startup, posted a long rant about how city life and corporate greed had clearly turned me into a sociopath. People who had never once bothered to ask how I was doing were now demanding that I return the money immediately. They called me a thief, a sociopath, a snake, and a terrible daughter. They whipped each other into a self-righteous frenzy, feeding off my mother and her fake tragedy. A normal person might have been devastated. A normal person might have deleted their account, cried themselves to sleep, or frantically posted a defensive response trying to explain the complexities of irrevocable trusts and corporate fraud to a mob of angry relatives. I did none of those things. I took a sip of my wine, savoring the dry, fruity notes. Then I began to take screenshots. I captured the original post. I captured every single defamatory comment. I made sure to get clear images of Aunt Brenda accusing me of elder abuse and Cousin Todd calling for my arrest. In my line of work, libel is a very serious civil offense, especially when it is directed at a licensed financial professional whose career depends entirely on public trust and fiduciary integrity. Susan thought she was building a digital army to shame me into submission. She did not realize she was just handing me a neatly packaged, time-stamped folder of legally actionable evidence. I did not block them. I did not untag myself. I let the post stay exactly where it was, a glowing monument to their stupidity. I finished my sushi, closed the application, and went to bed with a smile on my face. They were throwing everything they had at me, completely unaware that their public tantrum was about to backfire in the most spectacular way possible. The next few days passed in a strange, isolated vacuum. My phone, which usually buzzed a dozen times a day with demands from my parents or passive-aggressive texts from Olivia, was completely silent. The digital mob on my mother and her Facebook post had eventually run out of steam, but the damage within our extended social circle was complete. I was officially the pariah of the family. No one reached out to ask for my side of the story. No one called to see if the accusations were true. They had simply consumed the drama past their judgments and ostracized me without a second thought. I was completely cut off. It was a tactic my parents had used on others before. Whenever a relative or a business partner challenged my father and his authority, or my mother and her narrative, they would rally the family to freeze that person out entirely. The silence was meant to break you. It was designed to induce a sense of panic and loneliness so profound that you would eventually crawl back begging for forgiveness and ready to comply with whatever they demanded. But they had fundamentally misunderstood who I was. I did not feel panicked. I felt a profound, almost weightless sense of relief. I spent my weekend doing things I had not had the energy for in years. I went for long runs along the lakefront. I read a book from cover to cover without being interrupted by a manufactured family emergency. I did not deactivate my social media accounts. I left my mother and her post exactly where it was, a digital monument to her manipulation slowly gathering dust. Let them have their echo chamber. I had peace. By Tuesday morning, I was back at my desk, deep into a complex portfolio restructuring for a client. The firm was quiet. The incident with Jamal completely forgotten by everyone, except perhaps the security guards who still gave me a respectful nod when I walked through the lobby. I felt untouchable. Then at exactly 11 in the morning, a new email notification popped up in the corner of my monitor. It was not from a client. It was not an internal firm memo. The sender was listed as Harrison and Caldwell, LLP. They were a mid-sized, aggressive litigation firm located a few blocks down the street, known primarily for taking on high-conflict corporate disputes and messy estate litigation. My father had used them once before years ago when he sued a former business partner over a breached non-compete clause. I stopped typing. The cursor blinked steadily on my spreadsheet. I moved the mouse over the notification and clicked to open the email. The subject line was written in stark, bold letters. Notice of intent to sue for corporate embezzlement and breach of fiduciary duty. I leaned back in my chair, scanning the body of the email. It was a formal legal communication heavy with aggressive legal jargon. The letter stated that they represented Richard and his corporate entities. It officially accused me of executing unauthorized wire transfers, abusing my power of attorney, and embezzling over $1.2 million from corporate operating accounts. It demanded the immediate return of all funds within 72 hours. If the funds were not returned by Friday at 5 in the afternoon, they would file a formal complaint in federal court, seek an emergency injunction to freeze my personal assets, and forward the matter to the district attorney for criminal prosecution. I read the letter a second time, a cold, analytical focus replacing any initial surprise. My father had actually done it. After failing to intimidate me physically through Jamal, and failing to break me emotionally through my mother and her social media smear campaign, he was now trying to use the legal system to terrorize me. He was betting everything on the assumption that a formal letter from an expensive law firm would scare me into wiring the money back. He thought I would panic at the word embezzlement and immediately fold to protect my career. He had no idea that I had spent the last 5 years actively protecting his assets from people exactly like Harrison and Caldwell. I did not reply to the email. I did not forward it to my own lawyer immediately. I simply saved a copy to my secure cloud drive, closed the window, and picked up my coffee. The 72-hour countdown had begun. They thought they had backed me into a corner with this legal threat. They did not realize they had just handed me the very weapon I needed to permanently dismantle their entire house of cards. The real war was about to begin, and I knew exactly how I was going to end it. I printed a hard copy of the cease and desist letter, needing to hold the physical threat in my hands. The heavy stock paper felt cold. I read through the dense paragraphs of legal intimidation, dissecting every single word. The lawyers at Harrison and Caldwell were good, I had to give them that. They painted a devastatingly convincing picture of an elder abuse scenario, claiming my father was in a state of cognitive decline when he signed the power of attorney documents 5 years ago. They completely fabricated a narrative that the $1.2 million was the operational lifeblood of his company, and my sudden withdrawal was an act of corporate sabotage designed to bankrupt him. It was a brilliant piece of fiction designed to terrify a normal person into immediate submission. The letter explicitly threatened to file an injunction in federal court by Friday afternoon. They promised to freeze my personal bank accounts, my retirement funds, and even the equity in my apartment. They wanted to financially paralyze me so I could not even afford to hire my own defense attorney. It was the exact playbook my father had used to crush his smaller business rivals for decades. Now he was turning his favorite weapon on his own daughter. As I was meticulously highlighting the glaring legal holes in their argument, my desk phone buzzed. It was Mr. Harrison, my managing director. He asked me to step into his office immediately. I gathered my notepad and walked down the quiet, carpeted hallway. Mr. Harrison was standing by his window, overlooking the Chicago skyline, his hands clasped firmly behind his back. When I walked in and closed the glass door, he turned around. His expression was not angry, but it carried the heavy, exhausted weight of corporate risk management. He gestured for me to sit down in one of the leather chairs facing his massive mahogany desk. "Natalie," he began, his voice low and measured. "Our internal legal compliance department just received a courtesy copy of a cease and desist letter from Harrison and Caldwell. They are naming you as the primary defendant in a corporate embezzlement suit, and they are naming our firm as a secondary party of interest because you used our network servers to execute the wire transfers. I felt a sharp prick of anger, not at Mr. Harrison, but at the sheer malice of my father. Sending a copy to my employer was a calculated move to threaten my job. He was trying to burn my entire professional life to the ground. I can assure you the allegations are entirely baseless, I said, keeping my voice perfectly steady. The funds in question were held in an irrevocable trust of which I am the sole legal beneficiary. I executed a standard reallocation of my own assets. It is a desperate bluff from a man who is currently drowning in debt he cannot repay. Mr. Harrison sighed, sitting down heavily in his leather chair. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. I believe you, Natalie. I saw the man who came into our lobby yesterday. I know what a panicked, over-leveraged amateur looks like. But in our industry, reality often matters less than optics. We manage billions of dollars for families who demand absolute financial discretion and zero drama. If Harrison and Caldwell file a federal lawsuit on Friday, accusing one of my senior wealth managers of embezzling from her own elderly parents, the financial press will pick it up instantly. It will be a public relations nightmare. We will lose clients. He leaned forward, looking at me with a mixture of sympathy and corporate pragmatism. I value you as an employee. You are one of the sharpest analytical minds on this floor. But I have to protect the firm. My advice to you, strictly as a mentor, is to settle this quietly. Wire the money back. Let them have it. You are young, brilliant, and you make an exceptional salary. You can rebuild your wealth. But if this goes to open court, even if you win, the stain on your reputation will follow you forever. Pay them off and cut your losses. I sat perfectly still, absorbing his words. Wire the money back. Let them win. Let my father use my hard-earned capital to save his failing business. Let Olivia buy her mansion with my money. Let them walk away from the destruction they caused completely unscathed while I started over from zero. It was the safe, logical corporate strategy. But it was also a surrender to the exact cycle of abuse I had just escaped. I appreciate your guidance, Mr. Harrison, I said softly. And I completely understand your position regarding the firm. But if I wire that money back, I am legally validating their fabricated claim that the funds belong to their corporate entities. I would be confessing to a crime I did not commit. I cannot do that. Mr. Harrison looked at me, his eyes narrowing slightly. You are playing a very dangerous game, Natalie. What is your plan? I looked him straight in the eye. Give me until Friday morning, I requested calmly. I will not let this touch the firm. I have all the documentation proving the origin of those funds, but more importantly, I have documentation proving exactly why my father is so desperate for this cash right now. He is hiding something massive, and I am going to expose it before his lawyers can even draft the court filing. If I have not resolved this by Friday at noon, I will tender my resignation to protect the company. Mr. Harrison studied my face for a long, silent moment. Finally, he gave a slow, reluctant nod. Friday at noon, Natalie. Handle it. At exactly noon on Wednesday, my phone screen lit up with a new text message. It was not another legal threat from my father or an aggressive demand from Jamal. It was from my mother, Susan. The tone of her message was completely different from the venomous Facebook post she had written just a few days prior. Natalie, please, the text read. I am sitting in the coffee shop directly across the street from your office building. I am alone. Please just give me 15 minutes of your time. This is a matter of life and death regarding your father. I am begging you. I stared at the glowing screen. A small, deeply ingrained part of me, the part that had spent 34 years conditioned to solve every family crisis, wanted to rush downstairs immediately. But the wealth manager in me, the woman who had just been threatened with federal prison by her own parents, knew better than to walk blindly into a trap. Still, I needed to know exactly what narrative they were spinning before the 72-hour deadline from their lawyers expired on Friday. I grabbed my wool coat and took the elevator down to the lobby. The coffee shop was small, quiet, and smelled heavily of roasted espresso beans and sweet pastries. I spotted my mother immediately. She was sitting at a small table in the far back corner. She did not look like the proud, image-obsessed woman who usually hosted lavish country club luncheons. Her hair was pulled back loosely, her makeup was intentionally minimal, and she was wearing a faded beige cardigan I had not seen her wear in years. It was a masterfully crafted visual presentation of a broken, desperate woman. I walked over and sat down in the chair opposite hers. I did not take off my coat. I did not order a drink. I simply rested my hands on the table and looked at her, waiting for the performance to begin. Susan looked up at me, her eyes already swimming with tears. She reached her hand across the small table, trying to grab my fingers, but I quietly pulled my hands back and folded them in my lap. She flinched slightly at the rejection, then let out a ragged, trembling breath. The tears spilled over her cheeks. It was not her usual loud, demanding crying. It was the soft, broken sobbing of someone pretending to be at the absolute end of their rope. "Natalie. I am so sorry," she whispered, her voice cracking perfectly. "I know I said terrible things on the internet. I know the letter from the lawyers scared you. Your father is just out of his mind with panic, and we did not know what else to do. I am not here to fight with you. I am here to beg for his life." I maintained a perfectly neutral expression. "Your lawyers just threatened to have me arrested for embezzlement, and now you are begging for his life," I said evenly. "The strategy seems a bit inconsistent, Susan." She shook her head frantically, wiping her eyes with a crumpled tissue. "You do not understand what is happening, Natalie. Your father is incredibly sick. His heart is failing. The cardiologist told us yesterday that he needs an emergency coronary artery bypass surgery by the end of the week. The medical bills, the specialized post-operative care, the rehabilitation, it is going to cost hundreds of thousands of dollars." She reached into her oversized leather tote bag and pulled out a thick manila folder, placing it gently on the table between us. Her hand was visibly shaking as she tapped the cover of the file. "Our corporate health insurance policy was canceled 3 months ago because we could not afford the premiums," she sobbed, looking me directly in the eyes. "Every single dollar of our liquid savings was in the trust account that you emptied. If you do not wire that money back, your father cannot have the surgery. He will die, Natalie. You might be angry with us about the business, but you cannot just sit there and let your own father die. You are a good person. Please, I am begging you on my knees, give us the money back so I can save my husband." The heavy weight of moral obligations settled over the tiny table. It was the ultimate psychological trap. Anyone else listening to this conversation would have thought I was a cold-blooded monster if I refused her. She was weaponizing my conscience, using the ultimate trump card of a life-or-death medical emergency to force me into submission. She knew my biggest weakness had always been my sense of responsibility, and she was betting everything on my guilt. I kept my posture rigid. "You are asking me to believe that a man who played 18 holes of golf last Saturday morning is suddenly on his deathbed," I said softly. Susan gasped, her hand flying to her chest. "Heart conditions are unpredictable, Natalie. How can you be so cruel? How can you even question a mother pleading for her family? If you walk away from this table without transferring those funds, his blood will be on your hands forever." But she had made one massive miscalculation. When you spend your entire career managing wealth and conducting due diligence, you learn to never take an emotional claim at face value. You learn to look at the data. I stared at my weeping mother, feeling absolutely no guilt, only a deep, icy disgust. You see, because I knew exactly what was really inside that manila folder, and I knew exactly what emergency that money was truly meant to fix. I did not even reach for the manila folder. I left it sitting perfectly square in the center of the small wooden table, untouched. Susan was still crying, dabbing at the corners of her eyes with her crumpled tissue, waiting for me to break down. She was waiting for the obedient, responsible daughter to open the file, gasp in horror at the medical bills, and immediately agree to wire the money back to save her dying father. She was a phenomenal actress. If I had not spent my entire professional life auditing complex financial records and learning how to separate emotion from hard data, I might have actually believed her. The coffee shop around us was quiet. A barista was steaming milk in the background, and a soft jazz track played through the overhead speakers. It was a perfectly normal Wednesday afternoon for everyone else, completely contrasting the toxic, manipulative war being waged at our table. I calmly reached into my wool coat pocket and pulled out my phone. I unlocked the screen and opened my photo gallery. I did not need to search for the evidence. I had taken a screenshot of it just 3 hours ago during my lunch break. Heart surgery is a very serious procedure, I said, keeping my voice low, steady, and completely devoid of the panic she was trying to incite. It requires a massive amount of rest, a stress-free environment, and the unwavering support of your entire family. Which is exactly why I find this particular image so fascinating. I turned my phone around and slid it across the smooth surface of the table, stopping it right next to her fake medical folder. Susan stopped sobbing. The dramatic heaving of her shoulders paused. She looked down at the glowing screen. It was a picture of my sister Olivia and her husband Jamal. They were standing on the tarmac of a private airfield, wearing massive designer snowcoats and holding matching crystal glasses of champagne. Behind them was a sleek, chartered private jet with its stairs lowered. The geotag prominently displayed at the top of the post clearly indicated they were in Aspen, Colorado. The caption beneath the photo read, "Weekend getaway to the mountains. Sometimes you just have to treat yourself. Grateful for the blessings." It had been posted exactly 4 hours ago. Susan stared at the phone. Her jaw tightened, and the pathetic trembling in her hands miraculously vanished. The weeping, desperate mother routine evaporated into thin air, replaced by a cold, calculating silence. If my father is currently lying in a hospital bed waiting for emergency bypass surgery, I continued, leaning forward slightly to close the distance between us. Why is his beloved golden child drinking champagne on a private jet halfway across the country? You would think she would be pacing the waiting room, holding your hand, praying for a medical miracle. Susan did not answer. She could not. She just stared at the picture, her face turning a pale, sickly shade of gray. "Let me tell you what is actually inside that manila folder," I said, pointing a manicured finger at the file she had brought. "There are no EKG readouts. There are no surgical estimates from a renowned cardiologist. That folder is full of fabricated medical documents that my father paid a sketchy clinic to produce. Because last month I noticed a hard inquiry on his credit report. He applied for a massive high-interest medical hardship loan from a secondary commercial lender." I watched her eyes widen in sheer panic. She had no idea I knew about the loan inquiry. But when you hold legal power of attorney over someone and their entire financial ecosystem, you see every single move they make. He did not take out that medical loan for his heart. I stated with absolute certainty, my voice slicing through the quiet hum of the coffee shop. He took out that loan because Olivia and her lifestyle boutique are completely bankrupt. She is drowning in vendor debt, her commercial lease is 6 months past due, and her creditors were threatening to seize her remaining inventory. He committed federal loan fraud, claiming a life-threatening medical emergency just to get a massive lump sum of cash to bail out his favorite daughter. And he was planning to use the money in the family trust, my money, to pay off that fraudulent medical loan before the bank auditors caught him. Susan aggressively grabbed the manila folder and pulled it tightly against her chest, as if she could hide the physical evidence of their crime from my sight. "You are crazy," she whispered, though her voice lacked any real conviction. It sounded hollow and desperate. "You are making this up. You have always been a paranoid, bitter girl who envies her sister. I am a licensed wealth manager who just caught you and your husband attempting to execute a federal financial crime," I corrected her coldly. "You brought me a fake medical file and tried to manipulate my empathy to fund your fraud. You used his life as a bargaining chip so Olivia and Jamal could go skiing in Aspen." I reached across the table and retrieved my phone, sliding it smoothly back into my pocket. "The lawyers at Harrison and Caldwell gave me until Friday at 5 in the afternoon to wire the money back," I said, standing up from the table and adjusting my coat. "But you can tell them not to bother drafting that federal injunction. Because if they file that lawsuit, my very first move in discovery will be to subpoena my father and his actual medical records, along with the financial ledgers of Olivia and her boutique. I will expose his loan fraud in open court, and I will make sure the IRS and the lender know exactly where that money went. Susan looked up at me completely defeated. The mask was entirely gone. There was no love in her eyes, only a deep, venomous resentment. "You are destroying this family," she hissed through her teeth, her true nature finally exposed. "No," I replied, looking down at her with absolute pity. "I just stopped financing the destruction. Enjoy your coffee, Susan." I turned around and walked out of the shop, the crisp afternoon air hitting my face. The legal threat was effectively neutralized. Now it was time to finish this on my own terms. I had barely taken 2 steps toward the door when I heard the sharp scrape of a wooden chair violently pushing back against the tile floor. Before I could even turn my head, a splash of hot liquid hit the back of my wool coat, soaking instantly through the thick fabric and searing against my shoulder. I stopped dead in my tracks. The entire coffee shop fell into a stunned, absolute silence. The soft jazz music playing overhead suddenly felt entirely out of place. I slowly turned around. Susan was standing there, her chest heaving, her hands still gripping the empty ceramic mug. Her face was contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. The pitiful weeping mother was gone. In her place was a vicious, cornered animal who had just realized her ultimate trap had failed. "You are dead to me," she screamed, her voice echoing off the brick walls of the cafe. People at the surrounding tables openly stared, some pulling out their phones to record. "You hear me, Natalie? You are no longer my daughter. You are a cold, heartless witch, and I curse the day I gave birth to you. Do not ever contact us again. You are entirely cut out of this family." I looked at the dark coffee stain dripping down the back of my expensive coat. I did not yell back. I did not cry. I simply slipped the coat off my shoulders, folded it neatly with the stain on the inside, and draped it over my arm. "That is the best financial advice you have ever given me, Susan," I replied, my voice calm enough to carry through the dead silent room. "I will be sure to forward the dry cleaning bill to your lawyers." I turned back around and walked out of the glass doors, leaving her standing there looking completely unhinged in front of a dozen strangers. The cold Chicago wind hit my silk blouse, but I did not feel the chill. I felt an overwhelming, intoxicating sense of liberation. The final thread tying me to their toxic web had just been severed by her own hand. I crossed the street and entered the grand marble lobby of my office building. Just as I stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for my floor, my phone began to vibrate in my pocket. I pulled it out. The caller identification displayed my sister and her name, Olivia. She never called me unless she needed money or wanted to rub something in my face. Given how quickly news traveled in my family, I assumed my mother had immediately called her the second I walked out of the cafe. I swiped the green button and raised the phone to my ear. "Well, well, well," Olivia said, her voice dripping with a smug, sickly sweet satisfaction. The background noise on her end sounded like a bustling airport terminal. "Did you really just make Mom cry in a public coffee shop? You are truly hitting rock bottom, Natalie. I am having a fantastic Wednesday." "Olivia," I said, watching the elevator numbers climb. "How was the champagne in Aspen?" She let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "It was incredible, actually. Incredible. But not nearly as incredible as the phone call I just had with Dad. Mom called him sobbing, completely hysterical about how cruel you were to her. So Dad decided he was done waiting for you to do the right thing. He called his lawyers and had them fast-track the estate transfer documents." My heart did a slow, steady beat. "Is that so?" I asked mildly. "Yes, it is so," she gloated, her voice rising in pitch with pure excitement. "We literally just got the digital copies signed and notarized. The massive $3 million suburban estate, the commercial properties, and 100% of the shares in the family logistics company. They are all officially and legally in my name, and Jamal and his name now. You are completely cut out, Natalie. You get absolutely nothing. We own the entire family legacy." I stepped out of the elevator and walked down the quiet carpeted hallway toward my office. I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing out loud. She thought she had won the lottery. She had no idea she had just voluntarily signed up to be the captain of a sinking ship. That is a massive responsibility, Olivia, I said, keeping my tone perfectly neutral. Are you sure you and Jamal are ready to take on complete ownership of the company? We are more than ready, she scoffed. Jamal has major plans to expand the business using his real estate connections. Dad finally realized that Jamal is the son he always wanted, someone who actually knows how to build wealth instead of just hoarding it like a greedy accountant. So keep your stolen money, Natalie. We do not need it anymore. You are a lonely, bitter spinster, and we are the new owners of an empire. Do not bother showing up to Thanksgiving dinner. You are not welcome in our house. She hung up the phone before I could say another word. I lowered the device, a massive, genuine smile breaking across my face. Our house. Our empire. She had just confirmed exactly what I needed to hear. By legally transferring the deed and the corporate shares to Olivia and Jamal, my father had successfully removed his own name from the impending financial explosion. But in doing so, he had formally transferred every single ounce of that massive unpayable debt directly onto his favorite daughter. The trap was set, the bait was taken, and the doors had just locked shut behind them. The line went dead, leaving nothing but silence in my ear. I lowered the phone, looking down the quiet carpeted hallway of my firm. A lonely, bitter spinster, cut out of the will completely. Those words were meant to devastate me. They were designed to send me spiraling into a panic, to make me feel worthless, and to force me to crawl back to them on my knees, begging for a fraction of the family inheritance. Instead, I felt a genuine bubbling sense of amusement rising in my chest. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and pushed open the heavy glass door to my private office. I walked over to the small executive washroom attached to my suite. I tossed the ruined wool coat onto a chair, turned on the warm water, and grabbed a soft towel to gently dab at the small flecks of coffee that had managed to reach my silk blouse. As I looked at my reflection in the mirror, I did not see a woman who had just been disowned. I saw a woman who had just successfully amputated a gangrenous limb before the infection could spread and kill her. Olivia and Jamal were so blinded by their own greed, so intoxicated by the shiny facade of a $3 million suburban mansion and the title of corporate owners, that they never once stopped to ask a very basic financial question. Why was my father in such a desperate, frantic rush to give it all away? In the real estate and corporate finance world, nobody gives away a highly profitable, debt-free empire overnight. You only rush a sudden transfer of massive assets when the wolves are already scratching at the back door. And my father had a very, very big pack of wolves coming for him. I walked out of the washroom and over to my locked, fireproof filing cabinet. I punched in the 6-digit security code and pulled open the heavy steel drawer. I bypassed the standard client portfolios, reaching all the way to the very back. My fingers brushed against a thick, heavy manila folder. It was not a fake prop medical file, like the one my mother had tried to use on me earlier at the coffee shop. This one was incredibly real, incredibly dangerous, and legally binding. I pulled it out and tossed it onto the center of my mahogany desk. Right on the front cover, stamped in bright, unforgiving red ink, was the official seal of the Internal Revenue Service. As the primary financial power of attorney for the past 5 years, I was legally obligated to receive and review all official correspondence regarding the corporate entities. My father thought keeping the accounting books messy would hide his tracks. He thought quickly transferring the company to his daughter would magically erase his historical liabilities. But the federal government does not care about family drama, and they certainly do not care about rushed estate transfers. Inside that thick folder were 3 years' worth of notices detailing severe corporate tax delinquency, intentional misclassification of commercial assets, and pending federal tax liens. The logistics company did not just owe money to commercial banks. They owed the IRS over $2 million in unpaid corporate taxes and compounding daily penalties. By rushing the transfer of the deed and the shares into their own names, Olivia and Jamal did not just inherit the physical assets. Legally, they had just signed a binding agreement assuming full unconditional liability for every single penny of that massive federal debt. The IRS does not negotiate with fake real estate moguls who wear flashy watches. When the federal auditors finally came knocking, and they would be knocking very soon, they would not go after my father. He was officially off the books. They would go directly after the current legal owners. They would place an immediate lien on that beautiful $3 million house, seize the commercial properties, and freeze every single bank account tied to Jamal and Olivia. I ran my fingers over the red ink of the federal stamp, a cold, predatory smile spreading across my face. Olivia thought she had stolen my crown. She thought she had won the ultimate victory by kicking me out of the family legacy. She had absolutely no idea she had just placed her own head squarely on the chopping block. "You are very welcome for the inheritance, little sister," I whispered to the empty room, tapping the thick stack of federal audits. "Thank you for volunteering to hug a ticking time bomb." The real explosion was scheduled to happen right around Thanksgiving dinner, and I was going to make sure I had a front row seat to watch it detonate. Thanksgiving Day arrived with a bitter, biting chill in the Chicago air, but inside my penthouse apartment, I had never felt warmer. I spent the morning sipping coffee and watching the Thanksgiving parade on television, feeling a profound sense of peace. I was not cooking a massive turkey or stressing over table settings for ungrateful guests. For the first time in my adult life, I was entirely off the hook. But I had no intention of staying home. I had promised myself a front row seat to the explosion, and I never break my promises. I took my time getting ready. I did not dress like a woman who had just been disowned, publicly humiliated on social media, and threatened with federal lawsuits. I dressed like a woman who owned the world. I chose a tailored emerald green silk dress that draped perfectly, paired with classic black stilettos and a sharp black wool trench coat. My hair was styled in a sleek, flawless blowout, and my makeup was immaculate. I looked powerful, wealthy, and completely unbothered. The drive out to the suburban estate took about 45 minutes. When I pulled onto the sprawling property, the circular driveway was already packed with vehicles. I saw my Uncle George and his luxury sedan, Cousin Todd, and his beaten-up hatchback, and right in front of the main entrance, Jamal and his newly leased foreign sports car parked diagonally across two spaces just to make sure everyone noticed it. The house itself looked like a picture from a holiday magazine. Warm yellow light spilled from the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, and I could see the silhouettes of over 30 relatives moving around inside. They were celebrating. They were toasting to my supposed downfall and the crowning of their new golden couple. I parked my car off to the side, stepped out into the crisp evening air, and walked up the stone pathway to the heavy oak front doors. I did not bother ringing the doorbell. I still had my key, and technically, since the federal government was about to seize the property anyway, I felt no need to be polite. I slid the key into the lock, turned it, and pushed the heavy doors open. The grand foyer smelled of roasted turkey, expensive wine, and cinnamon. From the formal dining room down the hall, I could hear the loud, booming voice of Jamal. He was standing at the head of the table, tapping his crystal wine glass with a silver fork to get everyone and their attention. I walked silently down the hallway, stopping just outside the arched doorway to listen to his speech. "Family." Jamal projected his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "Today, we have so much to be thankful for. We are thankful for health, for family unity, and most importantly for the future. I want to personally thank Richard and Susan for their incredible trust and vision. They knew that the family business needed fresh, dynamic leadership. They knew it was time to pass the torch to a couple who actually knows how to multiply wealth and build an empire." A chorus of cheers and polite applause erupted from the dining table. I could hear Aunt Brenda loudly agreeing, adding a snide comment about how nice it was to finally have real business owners at the helm. Olivia chimed in, her voice dripping with fake humility. "We are just so blessed to be able to take care of my parents in their golden years. This house, the company, it is a huge responsibility, but Jamal and I are ready to take this family to the next level." More applause followed. It was a perfectly orchestrated echo chamber of delusion. They were completely insulated in their own arrogance, congratulating themselves on a massive theft that was actually a financial suicide mission. I decided they had enjoyed enough celebration for one evening. I stepped out from the shadows of the hallway and walked directly into the center of the brightly lit dining room. My heels clicked sharply against the hardwood floor with a slow, deliberate rhythm. I did not say a word. I simply stood at the end of the massive mahogany table, letting my presence register. The reaction was instantaneous and incredibly satisfying. The laughter died in their throats. Aunt Brenda stopped mid-sentence, her wineglass hovering inches from her mouth. Cousin Todd dropped his fork onto his porcelain plate with a loud clatter. The 30 relatives who had spent the last 5 days tearing me apart on the internet simply froze, staring at me as if a ghost had just walked into the room. At the head of the table, Richard and Susan looked like all the blood had been violently drained from their faces, their proud, glowing expressions shattered into masks of pure horror. Olivia, sitting right next to Jamal, physically recoiled in her chair, her jaw dropping open in shock. I took a slow, sweeping look around the room, making direct eye contact with every single person who had betrayed me. I stood tall, radiating absolute calm and control. The silence in the room was so thick and heavy you could choke on it. I offered them a brilliant, razor-sharp smile. "Happy Thanksgiving," I said, my voice smooth as glass. "I hope I am not interrupting the victory speech." The silence that followed my greeting lasted only a few seconds, but it felt like an eternity. Then the shock wore off and the collective rage of the room ignited. My father, Richard, was the first to move. He pushed his heavy wooden dining chair back so violently that it toppled over and crashed against the hardwood floor. His face, usually a composed mask of corporate authority, turned a deep, furious shade of purple. The veins in his neck bulged against his crisp, white collar as he raised a shaking finger and pointed it directly at my face. "How dare you show your face in this house?" Richard bellowed. His voice was so loud it rattled the crystal wine glasses on the perfectly set table. "You have absolutely no right to be here, Natalie. You are a thief. You stole from your own family and now you have the audacity to walk into my dining room on Thanksgiving. Get out. Get out right now before I call the police and have you dragged out in handcuffs." The spell over the room broke and suddenly everyone found their voices. The whispers started first, a low, venomous hissing that quickly escalated into open hostility. 30 pairs of eyes glared at me with pure disgust. The warm, festive atmosphere of the holiday dinner was instantly replaced by the toxic, predatory energy of a mob. Aunt Brenda leaned across the table, not even trying to lower her voice. "I cannot believe the nerve of that girl," she sneered loudly to the person sitting next to her. "Coming here dressed like that after robbing her sick parents blind. It is absolutely sickening. She has no shame, none at all." Cousin Todd, emboldened by the crowd, crossed his arms and scoffed. "What did you expect from someone who cares more about spreadsheets than her own blood?" he muttered, shaking his head. "She probably came here to see what else she could steal. Someone should check her pockets before she leaves." The insults flew from every corner of the room. Ungrateful, sociopath, criminal. It was a firing squad of self-righteous indignation. They were united in their hatred for me, bound together by the lie my mother had spun on social media. They felt powerful in their numbers, sitting comfortably around a table piled high with roasted turkey and expensive side dishes, looking down on the disgraced daughter who had supposedly tried to ruin their beloved patriarch. Susan seized the opportunity to play her favorite role. She pressed a linen napkin to her chest and let out a dramatic, trembling sob, leaning heavily against my father, as if the mere sight of me was physically draining the life from her body. "Please, Richard, make her leave." Susan whimpered, her voice projecting loud enough for the entire room to hear. "I cannot look at her. After everything we did for her, after everything we gave her, she comes here to mock us. It is too much. Please, just get her out of our home." The relatives murmured in sympathetic agreement, glaring at me as if I were a monster terrorizing a helpless elderly couple. They were entirely on the side of my parents, completely blinded by the illusion of the wealthy, benevolent family that my father had so carefully constructed. Olivia, sitting next to Jamal, looked incredibly smug. She crossed her arms and offered me a condescending glare, clearly enjoying the fact that the entire extended family was currently destroying my character. She felt entirely secure in her new position as the golden child and the newly appointed heir to the family fortune. Not a single person in that room paused to question why I was standing there so calmly. Not a single person noticed that while they were screaming and crying, I had not taken a single step backward. I stood my ground at the end of the table, absorbing their hatred without flinching. A year ago, this level of public rejection from my family would have crushed me. I would have burst into tears, desperately trying to explain myself, pleading with them to understand the truth about the irrevocable trust and the corporate debt. I would have let them tear me down until I was nothing but a hollow shell, apologizing for a crime I did not commit. But tonight their words felt completely hollow. They were screaming at a ghost. They were fiercely defending a fortune that no longer existed inside a house they no longer owned, protecting a man who had just sold them all out to save himself. I watched them perform their outrage, feeling nothing but a clinical, detached fascination. I did not break eye contact with my father. His finger was still pointing toward the heavy oak front doors, his chest heaving with exaggerated outrage. He thought he had the upper hand because he had an audience. He thought the collective pressure of 30 angry relatives would finally force me to drop my head in shame and walk away defeated. "Are you deaf?" Richard screamed, taking a threatening step toward me. "I said get out of this house. You do not belong here anymore." I did not move an inch. I slowly unbuttoned my black wool trench coat, folded it elegantly over my arm, and offered him another cold, unwavering smile. "Richard, please sit down," Jamal said in a loud, patronizing tone that he clearly thought sounded incredibly authoritative. "Do not upset yourself on a holiday. You have high blood pressure, and this woman is simply not worth the risk of a stroke. Olivia and I will handle this situation. This is our jurisdiction now." Richard slowly lowered himself back into his dining chair. He was still breathing heavily, his face flushed red with anger. But he looked up at his son-in-law with an expression of deep, pathetic gratitude. Jamal took 2 deliberate steps toward me, closing the distance between us. He wanted to use his physical size to intimidate me, a tactic that might have worked on someone who did not know he was secretly drowning in debt and cheating on his wife. "You heard your father, Natalie," Jamal said, his voice booming through the silent room. "You are trespassing. This is no longer Richard and his property. As of Tuesday afternoon, this entire estate, the grounds, the house, and everything inside it, legally belongs to my wife and me. We are the sole owners of this property, and we are the majority shareholders of the family corporation." Jamal looked over my shoulder toward the grand foyer and snapped his fingers loudly. "Marcus, David, get in here right now." 2 large men wearing cheap dark suits and earpieces stepped out from the hallway and into the dining room. Jamal had apparently hired private security for a family Thanksgiving dinner, a ridiculously expensive flex designed purely to prove his newly acquired wealthy status to the rest of the relatives. "Escort this woman off my property immediately," Jamal ordered, pointing a finger at me. "If she resists, physically throw her out the front doors and call the local police. I want her formally charged with criminal trespassing." The 2 guards took a hesitant step forward, but I simply turned my head and gave them a look so incredibly cold, so entirely unbothered, that they actually stopped in their tracks. I did not break my posture. I did not raise my hands in defense. I just stared right through them. "Before your rented muscle tries to put their hands on me, Jamal," I said smoothly, my voice carrying perfectly over the tension in the room, "I would suggest you let your wife finish her little presentation. She looks like she is about to physically burst if she does not get to show off her new toys." I shifted my gaze to Olivia. She had stood up from the table and walked over to the massive mahogany buffet. Right next to the silver gravy boats and the crystal wine decanters, displayed prominently like a sacred religious artifact, was a thick, leather-bound legal folio. She picked it up with both hands, her eyes gleaming with a manic, victorious energy. She could not bear to let Jamal have all the spotlight. "You think you are so clever, Natalie?" Olivia sneered, walking slowly toward me, her designer heels clicking on the floorboards. "You thought you could drain the trust accounts and leave us with nothing. You thought you could paralyze the business and force Dad to come crawling to you for financial help." But you overplayed your hand. You forced Dad to realize that the only way to protect the family legacy was to put it in the hands of people who actually know how to run an empire. She opened the leather folio and pulled out a thick stack of legal papers. The official gold notary seals and blue ink signatures gleamed under the warm light of the dining room chandeliers. "Do you see these?" Olivia asked, her voice trembling with sheer, unadulterated excitement. "These are the expedited transfer deeds and the corporate share certificates. Legally binding, officially filed and fully processed by the county clerk and the state corporate registry. 100% ownership of this $3 million estate. 100% controlling interest in the commercial logistics company. Jamal and I own it all, clear and free." She took another step closer, holding the documents up like a shield. "Look at them, Natalie," she demanded. "You have been completely cut out. You spent 5 years doing all the boring, miserable paperwork for Dad, acting like you were so important, and in the end, you get absolutely nothing. I get the mansion. I get the company. I get the legacy. You are just a sad, lonely accountant who tried to steal from her own family and failed miserably." Aunt Brenda raised her wineglass from the table. "Hear, hear," she chimed in enthusiastically, to Olivia and Jamal, the rightful heirs of the family. A chorus of agreements echoed around the room. Cousin Todd clapped his hands loudly. My mother Susan finally dropped her fake crying act and looked at me with a triumphant, venomous smirk. They were entirely swept up in the delusion of their victory. They thought they were witnessing the ultimate crushing defeat of the rogue, ungrateful daughter. Jamal crossed his arms, standing shoulder to shoulder with his wife, looking like a king surveying his newly conquered lands. "You are looking at the new era of this family, Natalie," he said proudly. "Now I am going to tell you one last time. Turn around, walk out of my house, and never show your face near my family or my businesses ever again. Guards, get her out of here." The 2 security guards finally gathered their nerve and stepped up beside me. One of them reached out a heavy hand to grab my arm. I calmly sidestepped his reach, keeping my eyes locked entirely on Olivia and the legal documents she was clutching so tightly to her chest. She was practically hugging her own execution warrant, and it was finally time to drop the blade. I completely ignored the guard and his outstretched hand. I did not run. I did not raise my voice, and I certainly did not flinch. Instead, I simply stepped around him, my heels maintaining their steady, unbothered rhythm against the hardwood floor. I walked right past Jamal and Olivia, moving directly to the center of the massive dining room table. I stopped right next to the extravagant roasted turkey that my mother had undoubtedly ordered from an expensive caterer. I reached out, picked up a heavy crystal decanter filled with red wine, and calmly poured myself a generous glass. The audacity of the move left the entire room completely paralyzed. The 2 security guards looked at Jamal for instructions, but Jamal was too stunned to speak. Aunt Brenda audibly gasped, her hand flying to her pearl necklace in absolute shock. My mother, Susan, opened her mouth to scream, but no sound came out. I took a slow, deliberate sip of the wine. It was an excellent vintage, undoubtedly paid for with a credit card that was currently maxed out. I swallowed the wine and set the crystal glass down on the mahogany table with a soft, definitive clink. "That is a very impressive leather binder, Olivia," I said, my voice projecting effortlessly across the dead silent room. "And I must congratulate you both on the remarkable speed of the legal transfer. It takes a massive amount of effort and expensive legal fees to push through state corporate registry documents in less than 48 hours. You must be incredibly proud of yourselves." Olivia raised her chin defensively, her grip tightening on the folio as if I might try to snatch it away from her. "It is called having powerful connections, Natalie," she sneered. "Something a low-level corporate employee like you would not understand." "No, I suppose I would not," I replied smoothly, wiping a tiny drop of wine from the rim of the glass. "But I do understand federal banking regulations, which makes this entire celebration incredibly confusing to me." I turned to face the crowd of relatives, making sure every single person who had insulted me was listening closely. Because if this massive estate and the family corporation are completely free and clear, and if Jamal is the brilliant real estate mogul you all believe him to be, I have to ask a very simple question. I paused, letting the heavy silence stretch just long enough to make the air in the room feel suffocating. If this is your house, why did the primary commercial lender send a formal notice of foreclosure to my office at 9 o'clock this morning? The words hung in the air like a physical blow. The smug, victorious smile vanished from Olivia, and her face in an instant replaced by a blank, uncomprehending stare. The wealthy, untouchable facade she had been projecting shattered into a million pieces. "What are you talking about?" Olivia demanded, her voice entirely losing its arrogant edge. It sounded thin and panicked. "You are lying. You are just making things up to ruin our dinner because you are jealous." "I do not need to lie, Olivia," I said, reaching slowly into the inside pocket of my black trench coat. I pulled out a formally folded thick piece of legal paper. Across the top, printed in bold, undeniable ink, was the logo of the largest commercial bank in Chicago. Since I was still legally listed as the primary financial guarantor on the original trust accounts, until yesterday afternoon, the bank sent the default notification directly to my corporate address. They initiated the automated foreclosure process at the exact moment the accounts hit zero liquidity. I took a few steps toward her and held the paper out so she could see the bold red lettering. "Take a look for yourself. It is a formal demand for the immediate repayment of a $4 million commercial loan, a loan that was secretly secured against the equity of this very house." Jamal lunged forward desperately, trying to snatch the paper from my hand, but I swiftly pulled it back and stepped out of his reach. He was no longer the picture of a proud, wealthy patriarch. He was sweating profusely, his chest heaving, his eyes darting wildly toward the front door, as if he was calculating the fastest route to his leased sports car. "Do not listen to her," Jamal shouted to the room, his voice cracking with pure terror. "She forged that document. She works in finance, she knows how to fake banking letters. It is a desperate trick to steal the company back." "A trick?" I echoed, laughing coldly. "Jamal, the federal banking system does not play tricks. And they certainly do not find it amusing when someone forges a signature to secure a massive high-interest bridge loan. Because that is exactly what you did, is it not?" I turned my absolute attention to my father, who was gripping the edge of the dining table so hard his knuckles were completely white. He looked like a man who had just stepped on a landmine and heard the click. "You thought you were so clever, Richard," I said, my voice dropping to a lethal quiet register. "You thought you could just transfer the deeds to Olivia and walk away from your own tax disasters. But you never actually audited Jamal and his accounting books, did you? You just trusted him because he drove a nice car and flattered your massive ego." I looked back at the crowd of relatives delivering the final devastating truth. Jamal did not just take out a small business loan, he secretly leveraged this entire property and all the corporate assets to borrow $4 million. He used the cash to cover his own failing real estate investments, to fund his mistress and her luxury apartment downtown, and to keep Olivia and her bankrupt boutique afloat. And because the primary trust accounts are now completely empty, the bank has officially called in the entire debt. You are all sitting in a house that the bank is seizing tomorrow morning. I tossed the thick stack of foreclosure documents directly onto the center of the mahogany table. They landed with a heavy, satisfying thud right next to Olivia and her pristine leather binder. The sound echoed in the massive dining room, and then the entire space went dead silent. No one murmured. No one insulted me. The collective outrage that had fueled them just moments ago completely evaporated, replaced by a suffocating, terrifying reality. My father, Richard, was the first to break the frozen tableau. He lunged forward, his chair scraping violently against the floorboards, and snatched the papers from the table. He brought the documents close to his face, his eyes darting frantically across the bold black text. I watched his hands. The strong, steady hands of the arrogant patriarch, who had built an empire and terrorized his family, were now trembling so violently that the papers rattled in his grip. He flipped to the second page, then the third, his breathing becoming shallow and erratic. He was reading the detailed breakdown of the $4 million commercial loan. He was reading the specific dates, the forged signatures, and the exact terms of the default. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking hollow and aged. He slowly lowered the papers, turning his head to look at Jamal. "Tell me this is a lie," Richard whispered, his voice completely broken. "Tell me you did not leverage my company to borrow $4 million. Jamal did not answer. He could not. The smooth-talking, confident real estate mogul was entirely gone. He stood there, swallowing hard, his eyes darting wildly around the room, looking for any possible excuse, any loophole to slip through. But there was nothing left. The physical evidence was sitting right there on the table. Olivia grabbed Jamal by his tailored sleeve, pulling on it frantically. "Jamal, say something," she demanded, her voice rising to a panicked shriek. "Tell Dad she is lying. Tell them we own the house and it is completely paid off. Tell them." But the silence from Jamal was all the confirmation the room needed. The relatives who had just spent the entire evening cheering for Olivia and Jamal suddenly shifted their energy. Aunt Brenda took a slow, deliberate step away from the head of the table. Cousin Todd crossed his arms and looked at Jamal with pure disgust. "The loyalty of my extended family had always been entirely conditional, tied exclusively to whoever held the most power and wealth." The moment they realized Jamal and Olivia were not the new heirs to a massive fortune, but rather the owners of a catastrophic, insurmountable debt, they abandoned them instantly. "You ruined us," Richard gasped, clutching his chest as he stared at Jamal. "You took everything I built and you destroyed it." "No," I corrected him calmly, making sure my voice cut through his sudden pity party. "You destroyed it, Richard. You were so desperate to hide your own tax fraud and so eager to replace me with a son-in-law who stroked your ego that you handed him the keys to your entire life. You signed those expedited transfer deeds because you thought you were outsmarting me. You thought you were leaving me with the wreckage. Instead, you gave Jamal the legal authority to take the ship down faster, and you tied Olivia directly to the anchor." Olivia burst into tears, a loud, ugly, hysterical sobbing. She dropped the leather folio containing her ownership certificates as if it were on fire. It hit the floor, the pages spilling out across the expensive rug. The legacy she had bragged about just 5 minutes ago was now a federal prison sentence waiting to happen. While Olivia screamed and my father collapsed back into his chair, I kept my eyes entirely focused on Jamal. He was slowly, quietly taking steps backward. He was trying to use the chaos of the room to slip away unnoticed. He was moving toward the arched doorway that led to the grand foyer and the front doors. He was planning to get into his leased sports car and drive away, leaving his wife and my father to deal with the millions of dollars in fraudulent debt. I watched him take another stealthy step toward the exit. I did not yell for the security guards to stop him. I did not chase him. I simply reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and unlocked the screen. "Leaving so soon, Jamal?" I asked, my voice ringing out clearly over the sound of Olivia and her crying. "You have not even carved the turkey yet." Jamal froze in the doorway, locking eyes with me. Pure, undeniable panic washed over his face. He spun around and lunged for the heavy oak front doors. I looked down at my phone and pressed a single button. It was not a message. It was not an email. It was a direct line to the detective I had been speaking with all afternoon. Before Jamal and his hand could even touch the brass doorknob, the piercing, unmistakable wail of police sirens erupted from the end of the long driveway. The flashing red and blue lights instantly illuminated the massive front windows, casting wild, frantic shadows across the dining room walls. The police were not coming for a noise complaint. They were coming for federal bank fraud, and I had personally provided them with all the evidence they needed. The wail of the police sirens grew louder, echoing through the quiet suburban neighborhood, until the flashing red and blue lights illuminated the massive front windows of the dining room. Jamal was frozen in the doorway, his hand hovering inches from the brass doorknob. He looked like a deer caught in the headlights of an oncoming freight train. The heavy knocks on the front door began almost immediately, loud and authoritative, demanding entry. In the dining room, the chaos temporarily paused, replaced by a tense, suffocating panic. Aunt Brenda turned to me, her face pale, her pearl necklace trembling against her chest. "Natalie, you have to do something," Brenda pleaded, her previous hostility completely replaced by desperate begging. "You have $1.2 million of the family money. You have to wire it to the bank right now." You have to pay off the default before the police come inside and arrest your father and Jamal. You cannot let your own family go to prison. I looked at Brenda, then at my mother, who was nodding frantically in agreement. They still believed the fairy tale. They still believed I was the villain who had stolen the family treasure. They honestly thought I was just throwing a tantrum and would eventually bail them out. I reached for my crystal glass and took another slow sip of the red wine. "There is no family money, Aunt Brenda," I said softly, the truth ringing through the room with absolute finality. "There has not been any family money for 3 years." Cousin Todd furrowed his brow, looking between me and my father. "What are you talking about?" Todd asked, his voice full of confusion. "Richard has a massive logistics company. He owns commercial real estate. You just stole his liquid cash. We all know you took it." I turned my gaze to my father. He was staring blankly at the mahogany table, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. He knew exactly what I was about to say, and he knew he had absolutely no defense against it. "Tell them, Richard," I commanded, my voice slicing through the ambient noise of the police shouting outside. "Tell your loyal audience the truth about your brilliant business empire. Tell them how you lost your major shipping contracts 3 years ago because you refused to modernize your fleet. Tell them how you started pulling equity out of the commercial properties just to make payroll, and how Susan completely refused to cut back on her country club galas and luxury vacations." Richard said nothing. He just closed his eyes, the image of the wealthy, infallible patriarch completely shattered. He looked small, defeated, and incredibly old. "Since he is suddenly too shy to speak, I will explain it to all of you." I continued, my voice steady and commanding. 3 years ago, this family was technically bankrupt. The business was bleeding cash, the credit lines were maxed out, and the commercial lenders were preparing to seize the assets. My father came to me begging for a miracle. And because I was still foolishly loyal to this toxic family, I gave him one. I walked slowly around the table, making sure everyone could hear every single word. I had made a series of highly successful early investments in the tech sector through my own private wealth management firm, I explained. I had generated roughly $1.2 million in pure liquid profit. To save my parents from public humiliation and bankruptcy, I transferred my personal capital into the family trust accounts. I parked my own money there to artificially inflate their liquidity. I created a financial smokescreen so the banks would look at the balance sheets and see a healthy, thriving company. That fake liquidity allowed my father to secure the loans he needed to keep up appearances. Susan gripped the edge of the table, shaking her head in fierce denial. "No," she whispered, her voice trembling. "That was our money. You managed it for us. It was ours. It was never yours, Susan," I corrected her sharply, refusing to let her maintain the delusion. "You just got so used to seeing my money in your accounts that you convinced yourselves you earned it. You lived off the illusion of my success. That $1.2 million I withdrew on Monday night was not a theft. It was simply the withdrawal of my own initial investment. I took back the financial shield that had been protecting you from your own failures." The realization swept through the room like a cold winter breeze. The extended family, the people who had spent their entire lives worshiping my parents and their wealth, suddenly realized they had been bowing to a mirage. They looked at Richard and Susan not with sympathy, but with profound embarrassment and disgust. They had been kissing up to broke people who were living on their despised daughter and her charity. "And that brings us to the true tragedy of the evening," I said, gesturing toward Jamal, who was still standing paralyzed near the front door as the police pounded louder. Because Jamal saw those inflated bank statements. He saw my $1.2 million sitting in the trust, and he assumed his father-in-law was loaded. So Jamal forged documents and leveraged this house to borrow $4 million, thinking the family had the cash to cover him if things went wrong. I paused, letting the devastating irony of the situation settle over them. "You were all so busy calling me a thief and praising Jamal for being a real estate genius," I said, a genuine smile touching my lips. "But the truth is, the only actual wealth in this room belonged to the daughter you just disowned. And now you have nothing left but a mountain of fraudulent debt and the federal authorities waiting outside your door." The heavy pounding on the front door echoed through the grand foyer, a rhythmic and terrifying sound that made the crystal chandelier above us seem to tremble. "Police, open the door," a muffled, authoritative voice shouted from outside. Nobody moved. The relatives were frozen in their seats, staring in absolute horror at the unfolding nightmare. I did not look at the door. I kept my eyes locked entirely on Jamal, who was now pressing his back against the hallway wall, looking like a trapped animal. "Let me tell you exactly why the federal agents are standing on your front porch." "Jamal," I said, my voice easily cutting through the panic in the room. "When I first noticed the massive irregularities in the corporate credit profile last month, I did not just lock the accounts. I ran a full independent forensic audit on every single transaction that had occurred since my father gave you limited access to the commercial logistics company." I took a step toward him, forcing him to look at me. "You are not a real estate developer. You are a con artist who ran out of victims. Your last 3 commercial acquisitions completely failed, leaving you with millions in default judgments. But you could not let Olivia or my parents know that you were broke, could you? You had to maintain the illusion of the wealthy, successful son-in-law. So you decided to use my father and his company as your personal piggy bank." I turned slightly so the entire dining table could hear the precise details of his betrayal. 2 months ago, Jamal approached a secondary high-risk commercial lender. He applied for a $4 million bridge loan, but because his own credit is completely destroyed, he needed a pristine guarantor. He used the family logistics company and this very estate as collateral. Richard let out a strangled gasp, gripping the edge of the table. "I did not authorize that," he choked out, his chest heaving. "I never signed anything for a bridge loan." "Of course you did not, Richard," I replied smoothly. "Because Jamal forged your signature. He copied it from the old vendor contracts you foolishly let him handle. He submitted fabricated tax returns and fake asset declarations to bypass the standard underwriting process. He even bribed a corrupt notary public to stamp the legal documents, making it look like you had personally authorized the leveraged debt. He thought the $1.2 million in the trust account would cover the initial interest payments long enough for him to flip a property and pay the loan back secretly. But when I drained those trust funds on Monday night, I immediately triggered a default on the first massive payment. The relatives who had been so eager to crown Jamal as the savior of the family now watched him with absolute revulsion. Aunt Brenda covered her mouth with both hands. Cousin Todd actually took a step backward, as if Jamal and his crimes were a contagious disease. Olivia was shaking her head violently, tears streaming down her face and ruining her expensive makeup. "No," she cried, her voice cracking. "Jamal would not do that. He loves me. We are building a life together. He used that money for our new business ventures." I looked at my sister, feeling a brief, fleeting moment of genuine pity before the cold reality set back in. "Olivia," I said, my tone softening just a fraction, "he did not use that money for your business. Your boutique is bankrupt and he has not invested a single dime into it." I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the final stack of papers I had printed that morning. I tossed them onto the table next to the foreclosure notice. These were not banking documents. These were high-quality printed photographs and lease agreements. "Take a close look at those, Olivia," I instructed her. "That is a luxury penthouse apartment located right in the center of the downtown financial district. The lease was signed 4 weeks ago, paid in full for an entire year, using the cash from the fraudulent bridge loan. The lease is in her name, but the wire transfers came directly from the loan Jamal secured under your father and his company name. She has been wearing the designer jewelry you thought he could not afford to buy for your anniversary." Olivia slowly reached out with trembling hands and picked up the photographs. She stared at the images of a stunning modern apartment. In the final photograph, Jamal was walking into the building, his arm wrapped tightly around the waist of a tall, striking brunette woman. "That is where the $4 million went," I stated, ensuring every single person in the room heard the absolute truth. "It went to covering his massive legal judgments, paying off his sports car, and funding a lavish lifestyle for his mistress. He stole your father and his legacy. He committed federal bank fraud, and he lied to your face every single day, all while you stood in this dining room and called me a thief." Olivia dropped the photographs. She let out a sound that I had never heard before, a guttural, agonizing scream of pure heartbreak and complete humiliation. She threw herself at Jamal, pounding her fists weakly against his chest, screaming at him, asking him how he could do this to her. Jamal did not even try to defend himself. He just stood there looking at the flashing red and blue lights, reflecting on the hardwood floor, realizing that his fake empire had just burned to the ground. The heavy pounding on the front door grew more violent, mixing with the piercing wail of the police sirens outside. But inside the dining room, all attention had completely shifted away from the entrance. Every single pair of eyes was glued to my father. Richard, the man who had always prided himself on his absolute intelligence and ultimate authority, slowly collapsed into his heavy oak dining chair. His hand gripped the left side of his chest, and his breathing became shallow and erratic. His expensive silk tie suddenly seemed to be strangling him. He was not faking a heart attack like my mother had tried to do at the coffee shop a few days ago. This time, the physical pain was entirely real. It was the catastrophic collapse of a massive ego, realizing the fatal mistake caused by his own arrogance. He looked up at me, his eyes wide and filled with absolute terror. The gears of this deadly machine had just locked perfectly into place. "You finally figured it out, did you not?" "Richard?" I said, breaking the heavy, suffocating silence of the room. My voice was clear and completely devoid of any pity. "You thought that by rushing to sign over the entire estate and the company to Olivia, you could cut off all my rights and protect the assets from any legal trouble. You thought you were cleverly staying one step ahead of me to back me into a corner. You thought that sudden attack would break me and force me to come crawling back for mercy." My mother, Susan, rushed to his side, throwing her arms around his shoulders with a look of absolute panic. She glanced at the stack of foreclosure documents on the table, and then looked over at her precious golden child, who was crying hysterically on the floor. "What is wrong, Richard?" my mother asked, her voice trembling and breaking. "The company has already been transferred. Olivia and Jamal are the legal owners now. We do not have anything to do with that debt anymore, right? This property is safe now." My father could not answer her. He just sat there gasping for air, staring blankly ahead. All his smugness and pride had been crushed into dust. His silence was the cruelest possible answer he could have given my mother. "That is right, Susan." I smiled a cold and razor-sharp smile. "You and Richard have absolutely nothing to do with that debt anymore. You successfully erased your names from all legal responsibility. But do you know what the legal conditions are for transferring a company that is carrying massive debt and is actively being investigated by the Internal Revenue Service? The law does not allow people to just throw away their debts as easily as they throw away a daughter." I walked slowly around the dining table, moving closer to where Olivia was sitting on the floor. She looked up at me, her tear-streaked eyes filled with pure terror. The relatives who had been cheering for her just moments ago were now completely silent, watching the destruction of the golden child. "When you and Dad transferred all the assets to Olivia and Jamal," I explained loudly so every single person in the room could hear you, "did not just give them the ownership rights. Legally, you transferred the entire burden of the debt directly onto them. By happily signing that ownership certificate, your precious daughter voluntarily stepped up to take full responsibility for the $4 million fraudulent loan Jamal took out, plus the $2 million in federal back taxes. That piece of paper she is holding so tightly is not a deed. It is a financial life sentence." A horrifying scream escaped Susan and her lips. She stumbled backward, knocking over a crystal wine glass that shattered on the hardwood floor. She covered her mouth with her hands, her eyes darting from me to her husband and then resting on Olivia. "No!" Susan screamed, the shrill sound echoing through the room. "That cannot be true. We just wanted to protect her. We just wanted to give her the inheritance. We did not know about those terrible debts. You wanted to protect her by using me as a human shield." I exposed her selfishness completely. "But when I refused to be your sacrificial lamb, you panicked. Your greed and your obsession with status completely blinded you. If you had just read the contracts instead of rushing to punish me and prove your power, you would have realized that you were signing a financial death warrant for your favorite child. You threw her into a prison of your own making." I looked down at Olivia. She was clutching the luxurious leather folder as if it were a bomb about to detonate. She was no longer the arrogant woman bragging about her new empire just minutes ago. She was just a pathetic scapegoat drowning in debt created by her lying husband and her foolish parents. Jamal was still standing near the hallway, completely paralyzed, unable to even look at the woman he had just ruined. "Congratulations, little sister," I said with a tone of ruthless sarcasm. "You always wanted everything this family had to offer. You always wanted to be the center of attention and take the throne. Well, now you have it. This entire empire is yours, including the $6 million in debt and the very real threat of federal prison for bank fraud. Enjoy your new life as the sole heir." The sound of the police knocking outside turned into the violent sound of the front door being breached. Law enforcement had run out of patience. Heavy boots pounded against the marble floor of the grand foyer. The flashing red and blue lights shined directly onto Richard and his pale gray face. He dropped his head onto the dining table, burying his face in his hands and sobbing like a child. Those were not tears of remorse for what he had done to me. They were tears of absolute despair, knowing that his own arrogance and manipulation had just pushed his favorite daughter off a cliff. The Thanksgiving dinner was officially over, and the real consequences were just beginning. The heavy boots of the police officers echoed like thunder across the marble floor of the grand foyer. The sound finally snapped Olivia out of her paralyzed state. She dropped the luxurious leather folder, the corporate share certificates scattering across the expensive Persian rug. She scrambled to her feet, her designer dress tangling around her legs, and launched herself directly at Jamal. She grabbed the lapels of his tightly tailored suit jacket, her perfectly manicured nails digging into the expensive fabric. "Tell me it is a lie," she screamed, shaking him with a frantic, desperate energy. "Tell me you did not forge his signature. Tell me you did not put a $4 million debt in my name, Jamal." Jamal did not try to comfort her. The smooth, charming persona he had carefully maintained for years completely vanished, replaced by the cornered, vicious coward he truly was. He violently shoved Olivia backward, forcing her to release her grip on his suit. "Do not act like you are innocent in this." "Olivia," Jamal spat, his voice echoing loudly in the tense dining room. "You demanded the lifestyle. You wanted the private jets, the designer bags, and the luxury vacations. Your ridiculous little boutique was bleeding tens of thousands of dollars every single month, and you refused to close it down because you cared too much about your image on social media. Where did you think the money was coming from? You thought a mid-level real estate developer could just pull millions out of thin air to fund your endless spending. I did what I had to do to keep you happy." Olivia stumbled backward, hitting the edge of the mahogany dining table. She looked at him with absolute horror, realizing that the man she had married was not a wealthy savior, but a parasite who had fed on her vanity until there was nothing left. Before Olivia could utter another word, 4 uniformed police officers, accompanied by 2 men in plain suits, who were clearly federal agents, burst into the dining room. The bright beams of their tactical flashlights swept across the terrified faces of the extended family, finally landing squarely on Jamal. Jamal Davis, one of the federal agents, announced, his voice carrying absolute authority. "You are under arrest for federal wire fraud, bank fraud, and forgery. Place your hands behind your back immediately." Jamal did not resist. He raised his hands, his face pale and slick with sweat, and allowed the uniformed officers to roughly push him against the wall. The sharp, metallic click of the handcuffs locking around his wrists sounded like a final judge dropping a gavel. The relatives who had spent the entire evening worshipping him as the new patriarch of the family watched in dead silence as the police searched his pockets and read him his Miranda rights. "Take him out to the transport vehicle," the federal agent ordered. The officers grabbed Jamal by his arms and marched him out of the dining room, his expensive shoes dragging against the floor. He did not look back at Olivia. He did not look at Richard. He simply kept his head down, disappearing into the flashing red and blue lights of the night. As the heavy front doors slammed shut behind the police, the reality of the situation crashed down on my parents with crushing weight. Jamal was going to federal prison, but the $4 million commercial loan and the massive tax liens were still legally bound to their precious golden child. Olivia was completely alone holding the bag for a financial disaster she could not possibly repay. Susan turned away from the doorway and sprinted toward me. She completely abandoned her pride, her anger, and her previous declarations that I was dead to her. She dropped to her knees right in front of me, her hands desperately grabbing at the hem of my emerald green silk dress. "Natalie, please." Susan sobbed, tears streaming down her ruined makeup. "You have to help her. You have the $1.2 million. You can wire it to the bank tomorrow morning. You can stop the foreclosure. You can hire the best defense attorneys in Chicago to prove Olivia did not know about the forged signatures. Please do not let them take her house. Do not let her go to jail. She is your little sister." Richard struggled to push himself up from his chair. He leaned heavily against the table, looking at me with defeated, bloodshot eyes. He was no longer a proud corporate executive. He was a broken old man begging for mercy from the daughter he had just tried to destroy. "I was wrong, Natalie," Richard whispered, his voice trembling. "I was a fool. I let my ego blind me. But Susan is right. You are the only one with the capital to fix this. Name your price. I will sign whatever you want. I will publicly apologize. Just use your funds to save your sister from this nightmare." I looked down at my mother, who was weeping at my feet, and then at my father, who was finally offering me the validation and apology I had craved for my entire childhood. A few years ago, this moment would have broken my heart. I would have emptied my bank accounts to save them, sacrificing my own future to buy their conditional love. But I was no longer that frightened, desperate girl. I looked down at my mother, her manicured hands clutching the hem of my dress, like a drowning woman holding onto a life raft. I gently but firmly stepped backward, forcing her to release her grip. She slumped forward, onto the Persian rug, her weeping echoing in the massive, suffocated space of the dining room. I turned my attention back to my father. He was waiting for my answer, his breath rattling in his chest. He actually thought that a forced, terrified apology would magically erase 34 years of manipulation, emotional abuse, and conditional love. He thought my bank accounts were still an extension of his own ego, a safety net he could command whenever his own reckless decisions caught up with him. I walked slowly back toward the center of the mahogany table. The relatives parted like the Red Sea, shrinking away from me as if I were made of fire. Aunt Brenda could not even meet my eyes. Cousin Todd was staring at the floor. The same people who had been ready to throw me out into the street just 20 minutes ago were now holding their breath, waiting for me to play the role of the savior. I reached out and picked up my crystal wine glass. The deep red liquid caught the light of the chandelier overhead. I took one final slow sip, savoring the rich taste before setting the glass down next to the scattered corporate share certificates and the bank foreclosure notice. The sharp clink of the crystal against the wood sounded like a period at the end of a very long, exhausting sentence. "You are apologizing because you lost Richard," I said, my voice completely stripped of any anger or sorrow. It was just an observation, cold and clinical. "You are not sorry for what you did to me. You are sorry that you signed the wrong paperwork and accidentally destroyed your favorite child instead of your disposable one." I looked over at Olivia. She was still sitting on the floor amidst the scattered legal documents, staring blankly at the space where Jamal had been standing just moments before. The reality of her new, heavily indebted life had completely paralyzed her. She did not even have the energy to scream at me anymore. She was finally facing the real world without my financial shield to protect her. Earlier tonight, I continued keeping my eyes locked on my father. "You stood at the head of this table and proudly declared that I was entirely cut out of the family legacy. You bragged to this entire room that your oldest daughter would not receive a single penny of your empire." A heavy, dead silence blanketed the room. Richard swallowed hard, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated regret. "Well," I said, allowing a genuine, satisfied smile to finally break across my face. "You were absolutely right. Thanks to your brilliant legal maneuvering, and thanks to your desperate need to punish me, I do not have to bear a single penny of your debt. You successfully protected my wealth from your own financial ruin." Susan let out another agonizing wail from the floor, but I did not look down at her again. I had given this family everything I had to give: my time, my expertise, my loyalty, and my peace of mind. They had taken it all and demanded more. Now the transaction was permanently closed. I turned my back on the dining table, the weeping women, the broken patriarch, and the silent crowd of hypocritical relatives. I picked up my black wool trench coat from the back of an empty chair, draped it elegantly over my shoulders, and walked toward the grand foyer. Nobody tried to stop me. Nobody called my name. They simply watched me leave, standing amidst the ruins of a fake empire that they had all helped build. I pushed open the heavy oak front doors and stepped out into the biting cold of the Chicago night. The police cruisers were already gone, having taken Jamal away to begin his long journey through the federal justice system. The neighborhood was quiet again, the manicured suburban lawns looking perfectly normal, hiding the absolute devastation that had just occurred inside the walls of the estate. I walked down the stone pathway, my heels clicking sharply against the pavement, a steady rhythm of absolute victory. I approached my sleek black luxury sedan parked at the edge of the driveway. I unlocked the doors, slid into the driver's seat, and pressed the ignition button. The engine roared to life with a smooth, powerful hum. I pulled out of the estate, not bothering to look in the rearview mirror. I turned onto the main road, the headlights piercing through the dark. As I merged onto the highway, heading back toward the city, the towering, illuminated skyline of Chicago appeared on the horizon. It looked beautiful, full of endless possibilities, and completely clear of any toxic obligations. I turned on the radio, letting a soft, upbeat melody fill the cabin of the car. I pressed my foot down on the accelerator, driving toward the bright lights of the city center. For the first time in my entire life, I was not managing someone else and their crisis. I was not carrying the weight of a manufactured family emergency. The chains were gone. My wealth was secure. My future was completely unwritten. My life finally and forever belonged only to me. The story of Natalie serves as a powerful masterclass in establishing boundaries and understanding the harsh reality of toxic family dynamics. Society frequently conditions us to believe that family is an absolute bond, demanding infinite loyalty and unconditional sacrifice. We are repeatedly taught to set ourselves on fire just to keep our relatives warm. However, the most profound lesson learned from this narrative is that blood relations do not grant anyone the undeniable right to exploit your mental peace, your professional career, or your hard-earned financial stability. Natalie endured years of severe emotional manipulation, consistently playing the exhausting role of the responsible savior while being treated as a disposable scapegoat. Her ultimate spectacular victory did not come from engaging in screaming matches or actively seeking petty revenge. Instead, it blossomed from the quiet, calculating power of emotional detachment and financial independence. She simply stopped playing their rigged game. By firmly cutting off their access to her resources, she allowed their own unchecked greed, arrogance, and deceit to organically orchestrate their complete downfall. Furthermore, this story highlights the critical importance of financial literacy and relentlessly protecting your own assets. Familial love and moral obligation should never be weaponized as financial collateral. When you hold your ground and actively refuse to be emotionally blackmailed by manufactured guilt, you permanently reclaim your personal power. Letting go of the desperate lifelong need for toxic parents and their validation is the most liberating step any person can take. Natalie walked away with her wealth entirely intact and her soul unburdened, proving that sometimes the absolute greatest act of self-love is simply walking away and letting toxic people suffer the catastrophic consequences of their own deliberate actions.